Although there was a little bit of time where this wasn't tightened this morning, and it just slowly went until it was just the seat backs. But yeah.
I don't expect them to recall them. Given that Dr. McCarthy is
Similar issue for. No, he's been here waiting in the row.
Okay. You're off the hook. You can go whenever you want. I know this is really entertaining.
Are you not entertained?
Don't go back on that. But for anyone who was wondering what those conversations were about, they had to do with scheduling and the availability of witnesses. Because last week I had indicated to the parties that I wanted all of the witnesses through these proceedings to remain throughout the hearing. Some of the witnesses have constraints that, so Attorney Miyares and Attorney Cramb had both asked relative to certain of their witnesses that they be released, and I've said yes, they do not need to stay. So I've revised my expectation from last week. If you're a witness and you've already testified, you do not need to remain through the end of the day on Friday. So if you have work that you need to do, you're free to leave.
Thank you.
Now, are those in the back still able to hear? Okay. And I'll remind the attorneys, please keep your voices up. I know some of you are a little soft-spoken, but if you can keep your voices up. And that also remind the attorneys and the witnesses to let each other finish speaking before you start speaking. Okay? We have concluded the testimony on behalf of the petitioners, and we are now moving on to the witnesses who pre-filed testimony on behalf of the applicant. So if the applicant would call its first witness.
We call Robert O'Neill.
Good afternoon, Mr. O'Neill.
Good afternoon.
Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you're going to give today will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do. Good afternoon, Mr. O'Neill. Please state your name for the record.
Robert D. O'Neill.
Did you provide written testimony in connection with this proceeding?
Yes, I did.
On behalf of the applicant?
Yes, I did.
And you have a copy of it in front of you?
Yes.
And is that one volume or two?
Not sure what you mean by one volume or two.
You have a bound copy of your testimony, and what else is within the bound copy?
Within the bound copy are my pre-filed testimony, and there are 2 exhibits that go with that.
And what are those exhibits?
Hold on a second, we've got some hands raised. Is this?
I don't think the mic's on.
Oh,
Sorry.
you didn't show me how to do this.
The other mic?
Excuse me for a minute, I'm gonna go get Doreen.
Just that battery issue.
I don't know, but I'll find out.
A little red light on there, that's usually not a good sign.
see if she can resolve the issue.
Can I just get your name? We're not on the record, I just want to know what you're.
Yeah, Tom Cushing.
That's Tom Cushing, okay.
She's a witness.
Okay, I didn't know if he was counsel, so when he spoke, I wanted to make sure.
Okay, first.
They could handle. Can people hear now?
Yes, yes.
Thank you. You're very welcome. Okay, we're ready.
We were referring to your bound copy of your testimony and exhibit from the break. Could you describe what the two exhibits are?
Yes, Exhibit A is my CV, corporate resume, professional resume. And Exhibit B is a memorandum dated November 9th, 2018.
And do you have an extra loose copy of Exhibit B with you?
Yes, I do.
Did you sign your testimony under the penalty of perjury?
Yes, I did.
Do you have any corrections to make to your testimony?
I do not.
With these, so do you adopt your testimony, written testimony, your testimony in this proceeding?
Yes, I do.
Thank you.
Mr. O'Neill is available for cross-examination.
Thank you, Ms. Rothschild.
Welcome.
Good afternoon, Mr. O'Neill.
Good afternoon.
Would you please turn to paragraph 3 of your pre-filed testimony?
Yes.
You reference your experience with the DEP noise regulation under 310 CMR 7.10.
Yes.
Are you also familiar with noise and sound as regulated under 310 CMR 7.00?
7.00.
Specifically, the definition of air pollution.
I know that 710 is under the air pollution regulations. And that's a subset of the 7.0, but I don't know exactly what 7.00 says.
Okay. So to the extent that 7.00 contains its own application to the regulation of sound, you're not familiar with that particular regulation?
In my 30-plus years here in Massachusetts of doing sound, the 7.10 piece of the regulation specific to sound has been the one that has been, I'm familiar with, has been implemented through the Mass DEP.
And I'm not disagreeing with you as to 7.10. I'm asking if you have an understanding as to any independent requirements that 310 CMR 7.00 has as it pertains to sound emitted from a project.
I don't recall.
Sitting here today, you're not aware of that regulation, correct?
I'm not aware of specific references to sound in 7.00 that would be germane to what we're talking about here.
Fair enough. Ms. Rothschild, if I could provide a copy of the regulations to the witness?
You may.
Mr. O'Neill, bear with me, this requires reference to a few different definitions, but if you could turn to section 310 CMR 7.00.
Which I believe starts on the cover page, correct?
That's fair.
Yep. Okay.
Within 7.00, there are a number of definitions, and I'd like you to turn to the definition of air pollution.
Yes.
Would you read the definition of air pollution for us, please?
Air pollution means the presence in the ambient airspace of one or more air contaminants or combinations thereof in such concentrations and of such duration as to A, cause a nuisance, B, be injurious or be on the basis of current information potentially injurious to human or animal life, vegetation, or to property, or C, unreasonably interfere with the comfortable enjoyment of life and property or the conduct of business.
Does that definition of air pollution include any reference to sound?
This specific definition does not, no.
But it does include a reference to air contaminants, correct?
Yes.
Do you know if the definition of air contaminants includes a reference to sound?
Yes, it does.
So would you agree, having had an opportunity to review the definition of air pollution at 310 CMR 7.00, that it has an independent regulatory requirement applicable to sound?
I don't know, I agree that it references sound. I'm not sure it's an independent regulation. The Mass DEP implements sound in the Commonwealth through their regulation 7.10.
Okay. Well, let's look further then at the definition of air contaminants. That's also within 310 CMR 7.00.
Yes.
Would you read that for us, please?
Air contaminant means any substance or man-made physical phenomenon in the ambient airspace and includes, but is not limited to, dust, fly ash, gas, fume, mist, odor, smoke, vapor, pollen, microorganism, radioactive material, radiation, heat, sound, any combination thereof, or any decay or reaction product thereof.
So consistent with your memory, that definition does include the word sound, correct?
Correct.
So if we turn back to the definition of air pollution, that definition includes the concept of sound, correct?
That's correct.
And if we turn to 310 CMR 7.00, section 1,
7.01? Or
Thank you, 7.011.
Are you gonna help me out again?
Sure,
7.01,
subparagraph 1.
thank you.
You're welcome.
I'm there.
And it begins with the language, no person owning.
Yes.
Okay. Would you read that paragraph for us?
No person owning, leasing, or controlling the operation of any air contamination source shall willfully, negligently, or through failure to provide necessary equipment or take necessary precautions, permit any emission from said air contamination source or sources of such quantities of air contaminants which will cause by themselves or in conjunction with other air contaminants a condition of air pollution.
Do we agree that the proposed compressor station is an air contamination source?
Yes.
Do we agree that the definition of air contaminants includes the concept of sound?
Yes.
Do we agree that pursuant to 310 CMR 7.01, there is an independent regulation that prohibits the proposed compressor station from emitting air contaminants, including sound, so as to cause a condition of air pollution?
Yes.
Now, in order to determine whether the sound emitted from the proposed compressor station causes a condition of air pollution, we have to refer back to the 3 subparagraphs within the air pollution definition, correct?
I suppose that's one way you could do it. I mean, you're asking me to perhaps render a legal interpretation.
Nope, I'm asking you, in your opinion, having stated your intimate familiarity with the sound regulations under 310 CMR 7.00 et sec, whether the determination as to the sound emitted from the proposed compressor station causes a condition of air pollution is set forth within the subparagraph definitions of air pollution under 310 CMR 7.00.
There's certainly discussion of that in there.
Okay. So if you could turn back to 310 CMR 7.00's definition of air pollution.
Too bad these pages don't have page numbers on them.
I agree.
Okay, I found it.
Okay. And we read these before. A deals with nuisance. B deals with injury to human or animal life. C deals with unreasonable interference with the comfortable enjoyment of life and property, correct?
Correct.
So if the sound emitted from the proposed compressor station causes any of these conditions identified in the subparagraphs to the definition of air pollution, you agree that the project should not be permitted on the basis of sound alone.
So obviously you've got to define each of these terms and what they mean in terms of causing air pollution.
Agreed. So, and I'm simply asking you if that burden of proof is satisfied by the petitioners. If the petitioners establish that the sound emitted from this compressor station causes a nuisance, you would agree that the air permit should not be issued solely on the basis of sound.
Yeah, the sound regulation is pretty clear. You cannot cause a condition of air pollution, of which sound is one of those.
So we are in agreement. If the petitioners meet their burden of proof to establish the sound emitted from this compressor station would cause a nuisance, then the air permit should not be issued solely on the basis of sound.
Again, I think you're asking me to reach a legal conclusion here.
No, I'm not. I'm asking you to set aside the legal debate as to whether causing a nuisance is or is not satisfied. I'm asking you a hypothetical to accept if the evidence in this proceeding satisfies the petitioner's burden of proof. So I'm not asking you to help us out there. I'm asking you if you understood the burden of proof for the petitioners to have satisfied their need to establish the sound from the compressor station causes a nuisance, if that is an accepted hypothetical for you, do you agree that based upon the air pollution regulations, the air permit should not have been issued solely on the basis of sound?
Objection. I think it's self-evidently that it was framed asking for a legal conclusion on this.
My intent is the opposite.
I think he's, how I hear it, and correct me if I'm wrong, it sounds like he's looking for a professional opinion based on, as a sound expert. Not a legal.
I'll deal with it on.
So I guess, yes, if a project causes a nuisance, that is one of the criteria, that is air pollution. If you cause a nuisance, that would be one, you must satisfy that condition to not cause a nuisance in order to be granted the permit.
And I'm
For
limiting my area of inquiry with you, Mr. O'Neill, to sound. So you agree that if the proposed compressor station's sound causes a nuisance, then the air permit should not be issued on the grounds of sound alone?
Strictly speaking, yes. We can debate what causes a nuisance, we'll probably talk about that, but yes.
Agreed. But conceptually, we're in agreement.
Yes.
And I'll skip over B, subparagraph B, because I think that would result in some healthy debate between us. But moving on to C, if the petitioners satisfy their burden of proof to establish that the sound emitted from the proposed compressor station unreasonably interferes with the comfortable enjoyment of life and property, you would agree that the air permit should not have been issued on the basis of sound alone?
Again, they would not have satisfied that criterion, so yes, I would agree.
If I could turn your attention to paragraph 7 of your pre-filed testimony.
May I set the regulations aside? Or
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes, you may.
You said paragraph 7?
Yes, please. And specifically because it spans 2 pages, the end of paragraph 7.
Okay.
The end of paragraph 7 references construction sound levels,
Yes.
but also states that DEP does not apply its noise policy to construction noise.
That's what it says, right? Yes.
And you're referring to 310 CMR 7.10, correct?
Correct.
But there is no similar exception for construction noise as it pertains to the definition of air pollution that we just looked at, correct?
I don't think there is. I would need to check in 7.10 to confirm that.
But as far as you know, sitting here today, and the regs are right there, feel free to reference them.
Okay, just give me a moment. So there is a reference to construction and demolition equipment in 7.10 as well.
Correct. I think we're not lined up.
Okay.
Your pre-filed testimony states that 7.10 does not apply to construction noise, correct?
No, it's not what it says, the noise policy, which is different.
Okay. And that exception is something you found in 7.10, correct? That you just referenced.
That plus many years of experience.
Okay. But you didn't know about 310 CMR 7.00's applicability to noise until a few minutes ago, correct?
Well, I've always known that sound is considered an air contaminant in Massachusetts. That's a long-standing definition of knowledge.
Fair enough. And we read 310 CMR 7.01's requirement that no facility can cause by themselves or in conjunction with other air contaminants a condition of air pollution, correct?
Correct.
He's not reading the whole regulation, he's paraphrasing and leaving out the key word.
Okay.
Sustain.
Which
Such quantities, read the whole thing.
read, I'm sorry, which section now?
What you just read in 701.
Okay. Mr. O'Neill, could you please turn to 310 CMR 7.01 subparagraph 1?
Yes. Read the entire paragraph.
Per your attorney's request, yes.
No person owning, leasing, or controlling the operation of any air contamination source shall willfully, negligently, or through failure to provide necessary equipment or to take necessary precautions, permit any emission from said air contamination sources or sources of such quantities of air contaminants which will cause by themselves or in conjunction with other air contaminants condition of air pollution.
Okay. And we've gone over already, air contaminants includes noise, sound.
Yes.
Okay. And do you have an understanding as to how often the proposed compressor station would emit sound?
Whenever it's operating.
Do you have an understanding as to how often the proposed compressor station will be operating?
I don't know exactly how many hours per year it will operate, but my expectation and understanding is that it's going to operate the majority of the time.
Round the clock.
24 hours a day, yes.
Okay, so turning back to paragraph 7 of your pre-filed testimony. What is the foundation for your statement that Mass DEP does not apply its noise policy to construction noise?
Again, it's based on doing a lot of projects here in Massachusetts over the past 30 years, and that the noise policy, which states that a source of sound shall not increase the background sound by more than 10 decibels at the nearest property line or the nearest residence. DEP, in my experience, that's an understanding that construction is generally a short-term, temporary event, and that as long as the facility uses proper noise control techniques for construction, such as mufflers, etc., and reasonable hours, those are considered the noise controls to limit noise in that instance.
There's no regulatory exception contained within the CMRs that supports that understanding?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
And before today, had you had any experience with the application of that exemption to the definition of air pollution under 310 CMR 7.00?
I'm not following your question.
Sure. You reviewed the criteria of the sound policy under 310 CMR 7.10.
Yes.
We reviewed an independent obligation that the facility has not to cause or contribute to a condition of air pollution as defined under 310 CMR 7.00.
Yes.
Have you had experience with the department applying an exception to the definition of air pollution as it pertains to sound for construction noise?
Well, I guess I'll restate a similar answer in that I've never seen a numerical limitation placed on construction noise in an air permit.
Have you had occasion in your career in dealing with permitting to address whether sound emitted from a proposed project causes a nuisance to the local population?
Yes.
Okay. And was there an exception for review of causing a nuisance in those instances for construction noise?
Typically, my experience with nuisance evaluations are in jurisdictions where there are no regulations or guidelines for sound. In other words, there's nothing out there. So in that case, you might look at some other guidelines for what might constitute a nuisance. But Massachusetts, that's not the case because we have the noise policy which implements the air pollution regulations.
So is the answer to my question not in Massachusetts?
Can somebody read back the question, please?
Sure.
Was there an exception for review of causing a nuisance in those instances for construction noise?
Again, I have not seen construction noise handled that way in terms of being evaluated against a nuisance.
And that's fine. If your experience just doesn't touch on this area, I accept that. What I want to know is if your testimony stating that DEP does not apply its noise policy to construction noise applies only to 310 CMR 7.10, or if your testimony is also intended to include the definition of air pollution under 310 CMR 7.00.
I guess I've never seen it applied in either instance. That I think answers your question.
If I could turn your attention to paragraph 8 of your pre-filed testimony.
Yes.
You take issue with the 10 persons group's reference to 113 dBA at the Kings Cove Conservation Area?
Yes.
Mr. Rothschild, I just have that page from the HIA to show the witness, if that's okay.
Any objection?
Page, please.
Sure.
Do you have copies for the group?
I tried. They're going around.
What page is it?
From the HIA, it's page 123.
Mr. O'Neill referred to his testimony.
Thank you. Ms. Rothschild, as for numbering, would you like the exhibits or documents marked for identification to continue north sequentially, or do you want to reset at one?
I think it would be easier if we stay in the sequence. Mark it, this would be 17, I believe.
May I make a suggestion? We should also mark the memorandum that the witness had as an exhibit. Or do you just want it in with his testimony?
It was Exhibit B to his testimony, correct? I think it's in with his testimony, it does not need to be separately marked.
Well, let me ask the witness. Do you recognize this document?
I recognize this page, yes.
Do you recognize this as the page that includes the 113 dBA sound reference discussed in paragraph 8 of your pre-filed testimony?
This is part of it, but you should have the page 124, which is the next page, which then takes that 113 to the next step.
And that's fine. The health impact assessment, I believe, is one of the common documents.
It is a basic document.
Basic document. So you're welcome to reference it. Ms. Rothschild, do we have those available for the witnesses?
I'm sure that somebody in the room has them.
now have the full HIA in front of me, which has the same page that you just handed me, plus other pages.
Sure. And my only question was whether this is the page where that reference came from in the HIA.
Yes.
And am I understanding your disagreement with the 10 persons group's reference to that 113 dBA is that it did not include the propagation of that noise outward?
Right, in other words, 113 is what's called the sound power. So that is, that's independent of distance. So it's the power level of the entire collection of all the construction equipment that are listed here in this page that you handed me, figure 774, I guess it is, in this piece of paper. And again, sound power is only part of it. In other words, these light bulbs here, these might be 100-watt light bulbs, but that's just a rating of the light bulb. So that 113 is sound power level of the equipment, but that doesn't tell you what the sound level will be at some location, some distance away.
But it's a pretty good estimate for what the sound level would be if you're using Kings Cove Park, adjacent to the proposed compressor station site, correct?
No, it wouldn't.
So,
And I mean, if I may flesh out my answer, if you look at the next page 124 of this HIA, that paragraph then discusses what that 113 would be at different distances.
what's the distance at 0 feet?
So there is no sound level at 0 feet. In other words, at 113, that's a sound power level. That's independent of distance, at that no distance. So then you take it out to the property line of Kings Cove Park, which is, I don't remember how many feet it is, 100 feet, 150 feet, something like that. You take it to the nearest residence, which is what's done here in the HIA, of 650 feet. And the construction, that 113 decibels of sound power then goes to 56.3 dBA.
Okay, I'm not asking you about the residence. We agree that if you're 0 feet from the sound source, you'll experience a dBA of 113.
No, we don't agree.
Okay, so,
I guess first of all, you can't be 0 feet from a source. You have to be some physical distance. Again, this is 6 pieces of construction equipment on a site. And this analysis assumes that they're all basically stacked on top of each other, which we also know is physically impossible to do then. A combining sound energy level of them, as you can see from this table, each one has its own independent sound power. Diesel generator 102, etc. And they combine to be 113, but you can't say it's 113 at 0 feet. You need to go to some distance away to get a sound pressure level.
so it's impossible to meet the sound power level regardless of distance, is your testimony.
You say to meet it, I'm not sure what that means.
To experience a dBA of 113.
That's correct. Sound power takes your sound pressure level at a close-in distance and then does a calculation based on the size of the source and some other dimensional information that's done by standard.
So what would the experience of a citizen using Kings Cove Park at a distance of 20 feet from a sound power level of 113 dBA be?
Let me just, for example, the sound levels of this equipment at 50 feet are shown here in this table. So I think I may have touched on this somewhere. In my testimony, just give me a minute, please. So I guess I don't think I did a calculation of what construction noise would be for my testimony purposes at the Kings Cove pedestrian walkway. That's what you're talking about?
Correct. And you also don't render an opinion as to whether somebody using the Kings Cove Park while construction noise is being emitted would experience a nuisance condition, correct?
Just give me a moment. I think we just used the distance of the nearest residence here to do that. Actually, we didn't do it, we relied on this, the citation here in paragraph 8, the H&K, I'm sorry, the HIA report, which then took it from the H&K report.
Understood, but nowhere in your testimony do you opine one way or the other whether construction noise will cause a nuisance to residents of the Commonwealth using the Kings Cove Park, correct?
I did not opine on that.
And similarly, you did not opine as to whether construction noise would unreasonably interfere with the comfortable enjoyment of life and property for residents of the Commonwealth using Kings Cove Park, correct?
I guess the way I would answer that is that construction noise is a fact of our daily lives, pretty much wherever we live. And there is construction as it goes on. It can be somewhat louder than normal noise that's in our towns or cities, but it is temporary, and it does pass.
Do you have an understanding as to the length of the construction period for the proposed compressor station?
I do not know that.
Have you ever visited a compressor station?
Yes, I have.
And what was your experience?
Objection. Conform to that question. Experience of what?
Visiting a compressor?
If you
Okay,
could rephrase that, Mr. Hayden.
sure. What compressor station did you visit?
I visited one in Burrillville, Rhode Island, many years ago, well over 20 years ago, and I visited one in the Midwestern United States. I couldn't tell you what state it was, also many years ago, an interstate gas pipeline compressor station.
What state was that?
I said I couldn't remember what state it was.
Midwest?
Somewhere in the Midwest, I don't know.
And what were your observations of the sounds emitted from those compressor stations?
I was there to take some sound level measurements at a certain distance. Again, this was over 20 years ago. I couldn't tell you what the distance was. It was audible. I could hear it, but that's about all I can recall.
And do you have a range in which you're comfortable testifying that those sound measurements were taken as far as distance is concerned?
It was just too long ago. I don't have a range that I'm comfortable with.
You just remember that the sound of the compressor was audible?
Correct.
And in paragraph 10 of your pre-filed testimony, you describe the additional 1 dBA of the proposed compressor in the middle of the night as an imperceptible change.
Yes.
When you visited the 2 compressor stations, I take it you did that during the day?
Yes, I did.
And the sound of the compressor was audible to you during those visits?
Yes.
Would you expect that in the same position at nighttime, the sound from those compressor stations that you visited would also have been audible?
I would expect that, yes.
If I could turn your attention to paragraph 14 of your pre-filed testimony.
Yes.
You refer to blowdowns,
Yes.
correct?
Yes.
And you refer to the change in sound levels to be as much as 17 dBA?
Yes, with the caveats as explained in here, yes.
What are those caveats?
So this is the emergency shutdown, blowdown event. That's an unplanned emergency. Changes could be as much as 17 if 3 things happen simultaneously. Number 1, the vent trips, obviously. Number 2, that blowdown occurs during the quietest hour of the middle of the night. And that somebody is walking on the path, the Kings Cove Conservation Path, at that exact moment in time when those other two events are happening. Then it would be a plus 17.
Your background noise levels for the proposed compressor station site aren't drastically different between daytime and nighttime noise levels, correct?
I don't have the report in front of me with the data, so I'd like to see that before I answer the question.
Sure, that's another basic document, Ms. Rothschild. I don't know if the applicant has an additional copy of the Epsilon Sound Level Impact Assessment Report dated October of 2018.
I have my own extra copy, we actually have one.
Oh,
I think I left it at my chair. That's somebody else's.
Oh, it's okay, somebody else has.
Okay, thank you.
you're welcome.
I believe, if I may, the question you asked me was the daytime sound levels were not that much different than the nighttime sound levels?
Correct, background.
For background, understood. So,
Why don't you explain where you are in the document?
Yes, if you could identify what page number you're on.
sure, I'm going to give this answer in two parts because I think it really has to have two parts. So, I'm looking at the Sound and Impact Assessment Report prepared by Epsilon Associates dated October 15, 2018. On page 5-10, there are two tables which really summarize the absolute lowest hours that we measured for background sound, both during the day and at the nighttime hours. In those cases, I would agree with the question that they're not that far apart, but truly, these are just the absolute lowest hours measured over a 2-week period. To really understand how different daytime and nighttime sound levels are, you need to look at the full data set, which is part of Appendix B, and that shows you the true variation in sound at each of the locations, including the Kings Cove pedestrian area, and how that varies between nighttime and daytime. In that case, you may have, the sound levels may be easily 20 decibels higher during other periods of time than what are shown in these lowest daytime and nighttime tables.
Okay. But with regard to the first part of your answer, we agree.
The very quietest hours during the day, and keep in mind, daytime for these purposes is defined all the way up until 10 o'clock at night, which that's a standard US EPA definition. Some people might call daytime 10 o'clock at night. That doesn't make sense. I'm long in bed by that time. But for these purposes, 10 p.m. at night is daytime. So, but yes, with that caveat, they're not that dissimilar.
And you can calculate the change in sound levels resulting from an emergency blowdown for daytime hours as well, correct?
That's correct.
And the difference in dBA levels between daytime and nighttime is close enough that that change in sound levels will still exceed 10 dBA, correct?
I can answer your question if I just have a moment.
Sure.
Just to clarify, you're asking about the emergency venting
Correct.
source, correct? Okay. Right, so that calculation is contained in Table 6 of Appendix B of my pre-file testimony. That's where the 17 above nighttime background, sort of worst case example, comes from. I think your question was, what would that number be during the absolute quietest daytime hour?
Correct.
So if I look at Table 5-4A from the Epsilon report, that absolute quietest daytime hour was 44 decibels. If I then substitute that into this Table 6, yes, D could be 57, so that would be a plus 13 during the quietest daytime hour. Again, if with the same sort of set of circumstances, the vent goes off, it happens during that quietest daytime hour, which could be 9 or 10 o'clock at night, and someone's on the path at the same time, that would be a plus 13.
What are the nighttime hour parameters that you use?
The definition of nighttime for purposes of this is from 10 p.m. to 7 a.m.
Okay, so anybody walking their dog between 5 a.m. and 7 a.m. in the Kings Cove Park is technically walking their dog during nighttime hours for purposes of your sound level analysis.
That's fair, yes.
Do you have an opinion as to the increase in sound level resulting from non-emergency blowdowns?
Yes. But that, again, that information is contained in Exhibit B of my pre-filed testimony. So like we call that, for ease of convenience, we call that the planned case vent. And that will be scheduled for daytime only, and somewhat more restrictive hours during the day too, from 7 a.m. to 12 p.m. In that case, the quietest hour ever we measured during that time was 48 decibels. So at the Kings Cove property line, that would be a plus 9 for that event.
And if we took the nighttime data that runs through 7 a.m., the sound level increase would be something greater than 9 dBA, correct?
For the nighttime case, yes. Yep.
And
I'm sorry, that was for the emergency vent.
we changed gears. I was asking you for the planned case vent blowdowns.
Right, and I answered too quickly, because yes, if the planned case vent was planned for a nighttime time, then it would be a different answer. But my understanding is the applicant is committed to daytime for that planned event.
Well, and I understand how this can be confusing because we're using two different definitions of daytime and nighttime. Do you have an understanding that the applicant's commitment to vent during daytime hours only is following your sound level impact assessment definition of daytime?
That's my understanding, yes.
And you agree in paragraph 16 of your pre-filed testimony that a person, I'm going to give you a moment to get there.
Thank you. Yes, I'm there.
A person walking on the path directly across from a case vent would experience an increase over background levels of 9 dBA.
For the planned case vent blowdown, yes.
And you have no opinion as to whether that hypothetical person using the walking path of Kings Cove Park would consider that planned case vent blowdown to be a nuisance.
No, I can't really render an opinion on that. Again, the odds of that happening as I lay out in here, I would suggest that it's a very, very unlikely event that it would ever happen. Not that someone wouldn't be walking there, but they'd be walking there during the quietest 6 minutes of the day when that event was happening.
You can't rule out the possibility, correct?
Nothing is impossible. I'm just saying it's highly unlikely.
But if that happened, an increase in the ambient sound level of 9 dBA would, in your professional experience, be enough to cause a nuisance to that hypothetical user of Kings Cove Park, correct?
I did not say that.
I'm asking you.
I would disagree with that.
If I could turn your attention to table 6-3-A, which is on page 6-8 of your sound level impact assessment report.
Table 6-3A.
That's right.
Okay, I'm there.
This is the initial modeling before mitigation, correct?
No, that's not true. Because even in the base case, there's a significant amount of mitigation that's already been applied to the project.
Fair enough. So in the base case for Kings Cove Park, you found there to be a violation of Mass DEP noise policy, correct?
In this evaluation, it will be plus 11 there, yes.
So that's a violation of the noise policy
That's what it says right there on the table.
for both daytime and nighttime as reflected in table 6-3- table 6-3B.
Correct.
And then if you could turn to table 6-9A. This is the base case plus mitigation case 1 plus mitigation case 3, correct?
That's correct.
And you find no violations of Mass DEP noise policy there.
Correct.
And in table 6-9A, the combined project and background noise level is in every instance greater than the modeled project only noise level. Correct?
No, that's not correct.
Okay, which one am I missing?
For example, the Bridge Street residence, receptor B as in boy, model project level is 44. And you said the combined one is 49, because the background is 48 there. And
Okay, I wasn't looking at background. I wasn't asking about background, okay? What I'm asking is essentially column 2 and 3. So the modeled project only noise level, and then the combined project plus background noise level.
yes, okay. So what's the question?
Whether the combined project and background noise level is in every instance greater than the modeled project only noise level proposed.
Well, it physically has to be. It has to be equal to or greater than,
Why is that?
because you're adding the background plus any contribution from the project. So it has to either be the same, which it is at receptor E, for example, where the project doesn't change it at all, to several other receptors where it adds, maybe a decibel to the total. So physically, it always has to go up when you take what's out there today and you throw any sorts of sound out there. It may be a very teeny change, but it'll always go up something.
So, and are you following my reference to columns 2 and 3?
I think so. You're saying the model project only noise level, which is one column, that's what you're calling column 2.
Yes?
And then you combine project and background noise level, you're calling that column 3.
Yes.
Yes.
And to your point, if we refer to the background noise level as column 1 plus column 2 always has to result in a greater number in column 3 than in column 2.
Or column 1.
Right.
Right. Column 3 will always be higher than either column 1 or column 2 by itself.
And that's regardless as to the situation, that's just more of a general principle.
Right.
Based upon your education, training, and experience.
Principle of acoustics, yeah.
If I could turn your attention to the next page, table 6-9-B.
Okay.
For both Kings Cove Park and Bridge Street, column 3 is not greater than column 2.
Round to the nearest whole decibel, they are the same. As I said, it has to be equal to or higher than either column 1 or column 2. Sometimes it'll be equal to.
So everything we just covered, which seemed pretty clear, is now out the door. The numbers can be the same with the explanation that there's some rounding involved, and now the numbers can be identical? Is,
Rephrase the question. Not accurate characterizing what he said. It's a very good question.
Sustained. You could rephrase that, please.
sure. Mr. O'Neill, I thought we just covered on table 6-9A the general principle applicable to your work that column 1 plus column 2 results in column 3 that has to have a greater number than column 2.
No, it's not what I said. What we're calling column 3 is the addition, logarithmically of course, it's not arithmetic, it's logarithmic, of column 1 plus column 2. Column 3, what I said for the previous table, it must be equal to or greater than either column 1 or column 2.
Well, we've got a transcript. I didn't follow your testimony that way, but I appreciate your clarification. Explain to me this. In table 6-9B, for rows C, D, E, F, and G, you do have an increase in dBA for the combined project and background noise level compared to the model project only noise level, correct?
Correct.
And those rows, C, D, E, F, and G, are at greater distances from the proposed facility than row A and B, correct?
Correct.
So why is the combined project and background noise level for row A and B identical to column B when at greater distances the number increases?
Because there's a larger difference. When the difference is larger than between two sound levels, then the larger sound level is going to be the primary answer, if you will. That's going to be the end result. The lower number, as the difference gets larger between two sound levels, the lower one contributes less. So therefore, the answer is going to be essentially the higher one. And again, we're probably talking some tenths of decibels here, which I dropped for purposes of the table.
Okay. Mr. O'Neill, thank you very much. I have no further questions.
You're welcome.
Mr. Goldrosen.
No question.
Mr. Miyares.
No questions, thank you.
I do have some
Okay,
questions.
redirect.
Mr. O'Neill, just at the end there, you referred to the fact that these numbers are logarithmic, correct?
Correct.
Could you explain what that means in this context?
Sure. So the decibel concept is logarithmic to accommodate the wide range of powers that we hear in sound energy. So I'll just use the table I have open here as an example. When we add a sound of 40 decibels and a sound of 47 decibels, it's not 87 decibels. That would be sort of arithmetic addition. You convert each sound to its energy equivalent, which I won't bore people with here today, and then you add those two energy equivalents together and then convert it back to a decibel amount. That's what's meant by the logarithmic addition.
And just for the record, you're referring to table 6-9B in your Epsilon report?
That's correct.
All right. And so again, looking at rows A and B, the background noise level at Kings Cove and Bridge Street was relatively low compared to the project only number, correct?
That's
I'm
correct.
sorry, basic project, I didn't get that.
It was comparatively low as compared to the model project only noise level, correct?
Correct.
Which is why the combined project and background noise level was so close to, in fact, identical to the model project only noise level.
That's correct.
Whereas for the other four rows, the background noise level was higher than the modern project only noise level at those locations further away from the compressor station, correct?
Correct.
Which is why the combined project and background noise level was closer to the background level than.
Speak up, please.
It was closer to the background level than the compressor station.
That's correct.
Thank you. In a logarithmic scale in this context, could you compare, for example, the noise level at 40 dBA to the noise level at 50 dBA?
So sure, those are a couple of easy examples. If you added 40 and 50, the answer is 50. Again, that lower sound level at that large of difference doesn't contribute any meaningful sound energy. It's still 50.
And in the scale of loudness as it's experienced by a recipient of noise, what's the difference between hearing a sound at 40 dBA as compared to 50 dBA?
To our ears, it would sound about twice as loud.
Twice as loud.
Correct.
And it was, in your testimony, you also referred several times to the absolute lowest noise level during the lowest hour during a long period, correct?
That's correct.
Could you explain what you mean by that?
Certainly. So we set out sound level meters at 6 different locations in the project area for 1 week. So 7 consecutive days and nights, 24 hours a day collecting data. Unfortunately, we had equipment malfunctions at 2 of them, so we repeated the whole program a week later and did another full week of monitoring. So for most of the data, most of the monitors, we have 2 full weeks of data. For some, we have 1 week. So analyzing either 7 days times 24 hours a day, it's 168 hours, or 2 weeks, which is 330 hours roughly. We picked the absolute quietest hour, either during the daytime, which I defined as 7 a.m. to 10 p.m., or the nighttime from 10 p.m. to 7, the absolute quietest hour during any of those days or nights in the 2 weeks. And we used that as sort of the rigorous test in here to look at a changeover background.
And when you define the sound level during that quietest hour, how is the sound level for that hour?
So in the state of Massachusetts, we're required to use the L90. So the L90 represents the sound level that is exceeded 90% of the time, or to think of another way, it's the quietest 10% of an hour. So if an hour is 60 minutes, the quietest 10% is the quietest 6 minutes in an hour. So the numbers we're using here in the evaluation, the quietest 6 minutes in a 2-week period.
That's true of all the numbers, background numbers that you use.
That's correct.
In this report. The quietest 6 minutes in 2 weeks.
That's correct.
Thank you. Go with me a second, please. In your testimony, you were asked to comment on the definitions of air contaminants, et cetera, correct?
Yes.
And also read section 7.011.
Yes.
And it was established that that definition includes the phrase such quantities of air pollutants that might cause a nuisance, et cetera, correct?
Objection leading.
Sustained.
Do you have an opinion in the context of obtaining air permits from DEP, what the phrase such quantities refers to in section 7.011 for noise?
Right. What I've always understood and how it's always been applied here in Massachusetts is the noise regulation through the air pollution control regulations in this Commonwealth are applied through the noise policy, which is policy 90-001, dated February 1st, 1990, issued by the DEP.
And is it your opinion that the project as mitigated for operation will be in compliance with Mass DEP's noise policy standards?
Yes.
And is it your opinion that with respect to construction noise, it is DEP's practice and policy to, in effect, allow construction noise to exceed the 10 dBA standard in the noise policy?
Objection leading.
Sustained.
Do you have an opinion about whether or not DEP applies its noise policy standard to construction noise?
Yeah, because as I said earlier, I do have an opinion of that, and I have not seen it applied in construction noise cases.
You were asked whether you stated an opinion in your testimony as to whether or not this project would cause a condition of air pollution, correct?
Correct.
Do you have an opinion?
I do. I believe that it will not cause a condition of air pollution.
With respect to the operation?
Yes.
What about with respect to construction?
I would also say it would not cause a nuisance or a condition of air pollution with relation to construction.
And with respect to construction, you described the way the, could you describe again how the construction sound power was calculated?
Again, so sound power is a combination of a measurement and a calculation. So one would measure a piece of construction equipment at a very short distance. Typically it's 50 feet away. You'll get a series of sound level measurements at that distance. You will then do a series of calculations based on the size of that piece of equipment, its dimensions. And this is all done according to ANSI standards, ANSI standards, to convert that to a sound power, which is always going to be much higher than what you actually measured because of the dimensional calculation.
And could you describe how that was calculated here with respect to construction equipment that's been called on the site?
So each piece of construction equipment was measured or came from a reference document cited in the reports, was converted to a sound power. So there's, I believe there are 6 pieces of construction equipment possible at the site that are listed there. Those 6 pieces were then added together as if they were all operating at their maximum power simultaneously, which I guess is theoretically possible, maybe not likely, but it's certainly theoretically possible. And they were also set at the very closest point to the nearest residence on Bridge Street, which is where the calculation was done.
Is that a realistic assumption?
No, it's not realistic. Anybody knows that you're not going to have 6 pieces of construction equipment physically on top of each other, nor immediately adjacent to each other. They're going to be spread out over a construction site in some kind of fashion.
Was it a conservative assumption to assume they were all operating at the same time at one location closest to
Objection.
your residence?
Sustained.
Objection, leading.
If you could refer to table 5 in the Epsilon report. Pardon me, I referred you to the wrong table 5. If you could refer to table 5 and exhibit B. That's basically the testimony.
Objection, there is no cross-examination of Exhibit B of this witness, so it's beyond the scope of the cross I'm reading it.
That is not correct. He cross-examined on with respect to exhibit B with respect to the noise from blowdowns.
I agree. You did question him with regard to the case venting and the blowdowns, both emergency and
I misunderstood the source for his answer, so objection withdrawn.
In calculating the impacts of plant case vents at the Kings Cove Park, where on the park were you calculating these values?
So to be conservative, in other words, worst case calculation, we assume that somebody was on the pathway there for Kings Cove Park. That's directly sort of in line with where the case vent would be, so the shortest distance.
Well, I would refer you to the label in row A under the heading description. Can you read that for the record, please?
Yes, that's Kings Cove property line.
So it's not the path, it's the property line right next to the facility, correct?
It's, I guess, maybe it's a matter of semantics here, but the way we used this was it's the property line of the entire site, the applicant's site. And from my visit to there, the walking path is not too far away from that property line. So we did the calculation actually at the property line, so it's slightly closer than the walking path.
Thank you. I have no further questions. Thank you for your testimony.
I just have some brief recross, Ms. Rothschild. Specifically with regard to tables 6-9A and 6-9B within the Epsilon Sound Level Impact Assessment Report.
Okay, I'm there.
So starting with the nighttime table at 6-9B. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I understood your responses to Attorney Child's questions to be if column 2 is greater than column 1, then column 3 can be roughly equal to column 2.
If the difference is great enough so that column 2 essentially controls the answer. So usually that's when the two sources of sound are 7, 8, 9, 10 decibels apart.
And if they're closer in decibels, then you would expect an increase in column 3?
Yes, maybe it's helpful to look at receptor D in that table. D as in dog. So in that case, you can see the answer in column 3 is 7 decibels higher than column 2. But it's because column 1 is 37. So that the difference is 6 decibels there between the two columns, so it only goes up 1 decibel. So it's not really important which column it is, but it's the total that drives the concept.
Understood. But when we were looking at the other table, the daytime table 6-9-A, we recognized that column 3 was greater than column 2 in every instance.
That's not true. It was equal to or greater than.
No, I'm asking you if column 3 is greater than column 2 in every instance.
In column 2.
Correct.
Which table you want me to look at?
At 6-9A.
So in table 6-9A, column 3 is always greater than column 2, yes.
And in 6-9A, column 2 is not always greater than column 1.
That's right.
Nothing further.
Okay.
Mr. Miyares.
Good afternoon. I've been silent all afternoon, but just had one question that might turn out to be a couple of parts. You were asking in cross, and you actually were asking the original direction of
Can you speak up, please?
policy that you understand that DEP does not apply its noise standards to construction noise. Did I get that right?
That's what I said, yes.
Okay. And where is that policy?
So that there's nothing in the policy that says that. It's been an application of the policy over the years.
Okay, so do you have the regulations still in front of you?
I do.
Could you look at section 7.10, paren 2?
Okay, I'm there.
Okay, and that section says 310 CMR 7.10 paren 1 shall pertain to, but shall not be limited to, prolonged unattended sounding of burglar alarms, construction and demolition equipment, which characteristically emit sound, but which may be fitted and accommodated with equipment such as enclosures to suppress sound, or may be operated in a manner so as to suppress sound, suppressible and preventable industrial and commercial sources of sound, and other man-made sounds that cause noise. Do you understand that regulation to say that construction and demolition equipment is in fact subject to the noise regulations?
I'll do my best to answer it, but your question may be better directed to the department itself. But the way I read it and the way I've always understood it is that's why DEP has been. If you read the rest, as you said, you have to fit it and accommodate with equipment. So there's always a requirement for construction equipment to have properly working mufflers and whatever noise suppression devices can be reasonably fitted to construction equipment, whether it's mufflers, portable barriers, things like that. And that's how I understand that DEP has implemented this piece of the regulation.
Okay, so is it your understanding that as long as the equipment is fitted and accommodated with the equipment such as you described, that the regulation 7.10(1) does not apply?
That plus I omitted hours of operation as well. There's often an hours of operation restriction on construction that the DEP will implement to also control noise.
Thank you.
Mr. Goldrosen, anything? I have one question, and because I want to make sure that I understand how these combine, the background plus the compressor station noise numbers combined. So assume I'm a small child and you need to explain this in terms I can understand. Looking at table 69A, for example, or 69B, if you could explain, as though I'm a small child, how these numbers, you take 40 and 47, you get 47. In that instance, you have the larger number. But in some of them, I understand it's logarithmic.
Right.
If you could explain it in very simple terms.
Okay. So if you have two sources of sound that are exactly the same, say it's 40 and 40, that will be a 3 decibel increase to 43. That's just one example. If they're equal, it's a 3 decibel change. So that's the rules of logarithms. You're looking at this table that you're looking at, for example, 69A. When you have two sources of sound, using our sort of column 1, column 2, column 3 for convenience. So let's just look at the receptor B at Bridge Street. So the background, column 1, is 48. The project only is 44. Those add to 49. Again, that column 3 will always be sort of guided by the louder of those two columns. So it's going to be 48 plus 44. So a difference of 4 decibels generally adds 1 or 2 decibels to the higher number. You're always adding to the higher number. So that 48 becomes a 49. I'm not doing a good job, am I?
No, you're doing fine. But you say generally, what are the circumstances where that general rule would not hold true?
So it always holds true. I probably use the word generally incorrectly. That there is there's no bright line. In other words, you really need to do these. You get tenths of decibels. You get tenths of decibels in column 1 and tenths in column 2. There's a little bit of rounding that goes on. That's why I say generally you might see a 1 or 2 decibel change there. Look at receptor D in that same table, 69A. So again, background is 40, wild only is 31. It's a 9 decibel change. This time it went up to 41, so that changed by 1 decibel. That had to do for rounding. Generally, a 9 decibel difference is going to be more or less the higher number only. That's why it's a little confusing, but when the difference between two numbers is 7, 8, 9, 10 decibels or more, The final answer is going to basically be the higher number, as you see in example D there, receptor D. 40 plus 31 is 41. It's almost the same as 40. It's controlled by a higher number.
Okay, so looking at column F, where the background's 42 and the model project is 36, that results in a 1 decibel increase, according to the table.
Yeah, I'm sorry, you're looking at receptor F, you said? F as in Frank?
Correct.
Okay, yes. So to get to column F, that increase above background, you take column 3, the combined number of 43, you then compare that to the background number. That's 1 decibel difference, so it's an increase of 1. That's right. That increase above background is comparing column 3 to column 1. How much of the project adds to the background?
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Nothing more.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Does anyone need a break before we call the next witness?
Maybe 5 minutes or so I can
Okay,
reorganize.
why don't we take 5 minutes, come back at 5 minutes to 3.
What's your hope? Okay.
Not you either, Amanda. Not ours.
Can you come discipline my children? We're having some issues.
First I have to learn how to discipline mine.
No, it's so much easier to discipline others, like guide and teach other
Right.
people's children.
Hi, David. Ray calling again. Just made it last week. Touch me. So I do get another opportunity. I work through I don't think so. No.
She's been with this since day one.
What? Oh, really? Hi.
We're related by marriage.
So, could you make that up?
That's what I, yeah.
Nick just returned this big pile
Right. Okay.
back. And said, is that on?
Yeah. That's the purpose of my question. Just wrote a lot of conclusory statements. Right. Right.
He's trying to how usually I know they can't write English, but so that it doesn't say, it's not even that syntax.
You wanted to realize that the all the regular regulations.
So then we're on two. And. No,
This is not reported.
it is. Yeah, these things. You know, but. He says, that's not.
It's very different.
Anyhow.
It's like punching jello to the wall.
Anything is possible. She can set the next 3 days.
All right, then I'll.
We'll take off a little bit. I'll listen to this a little while. Just curious if there's
This was what we talked about marking the 17 and then never got.
It's marked for ID, but not an exhibit. Thank you for coming.
No. Nick, thank you for returning this.
They were yours.
Yes.
Well,
Thank you so much. It was good to meet you.
It's my pleasure.
Good luck.
Thank you.
Did you change it or was it always there? Everybody. Okay. Okay, right here.
Not alarmed that the question 3. Goldrosen. What they should relax? I'll let you yeah, well, I mean, obviously, 2 guys to make sure.
I hope you don't mind using